So, here we are, the evening of Maundy Thursday. But we're going to start with some Bible verses about earlier in the day. And Luke, chapter 22, verses 7 to 13, going to be read to us by Frank. Thank you, Frank. Would you like to come up?
Luke 22, 7 to 13. Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed. And he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare us the Passover, that we may eat. And they said unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare? And he said unto them, Behold, when they are entered into the city, there shall be a man meet you, bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he entereth in. And when ye shall say unto the good man of the house, The master saith unto thee, Where is the guest chamber, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? And he shall show you a large upper room furnished, there make ready. And they went and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover.
Thank you, Frank. So, question. Why did Jesus want to celebrate the Passover? Kath's going to tell us now.
Wrong glasses, sorry. Exodus chapter 12, verse 1 to 14. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbour, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and top of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it. With your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals. And I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The Lord will be a sign for you on the houses where you are. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. This is a day you are to commemorate for the generations to come, and you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance.
Thank you, Kath. So, what would have happened at the meal we're thinking about? And this time we're not going to look at the Bible or drag somebody else out to read, but I'd like Andy to show us the first picture, please. I should think quite a lot of you are familiar with this. It's the Leonardo da Vinci painting of the Last Supper. And it gives me the opportunity to share what I think is quite an amusing little story that I read in a Christian magazine. Simon Peter went into a restaurant and he said, "I'd like to book a table that will seat 26 people." And the owner said, "I don't think we can do that because I don't think our kitchen's big enough to produce meals for 26 people all at once." Peter said, "Oh, it's all right. There'll only be 13 of us, but we all like to sit on the same side of the table." And it was only when I read that little story in a Christian magazine some years ago, I thought, well, yes, that's what he's done. And that's what several painters have done. And John and I have been searching. Well, we searched 2 or 3 years ago when I was first talking about this somewhere else. And there were various paintings, but they're nearly all variations on a theme. But in fact, it wouldn't be like that. Let's have a look at the second picture, if you would be so kind, please, Andy. This one is better, because here the people are reclining. And this is a very important thing, because all 4 Gospels tell us that they reclined at the table. So they didn't sit on one side, as Leonardo da Vinci or the others showed us. They were all reclining. And this is important because they're celebrating their freedom from slavery, and slaves weren't allowed to recline. But they are celebrating freedom from slavery, so they are free, so free people can recline. And of course, there would be certain foods eaten. We've heard about the lamb and the specifics of the lamb and how it had to be chosen and prepared. Bitter herbs, bread without yeast, remembering what had happened at the first Passover. And from that chapter that Kath read to us later on, it says in verses 33 and 34 of that chapter, I didn't expect Kath to read any more than 14, that was quite a lot, wasn't it? The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we will all die. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs, wrapped in clothing. So that's why they had the yeast-free bread. And of course, there would be other side dishes, sauces, and so on that were linked to the suffering of the Israelites. Various cups of wine would be drunk. Various psalms would be recited. I understand it was Psalms 113 to 118. I'm going to ask John to read Psalm 114 for us. Thank you.
Psalm 114. When Israel came out of Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of foreign tongue, Judah became God's sanctuary, and Israel his dominion. The sea looked and fled, the Jordan turned back, the mountains skipped like rams, and the hills like lambs. Why was it, O sea, that you fled? Why was it, O Jordan, that you turned back? Why, you mountains, why that you skip like rams, and you hills like lambs? Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool and the hard rock into springs of water.
Thank you, John. These days, if you go to a Passover celebration, each person will have a booklet, perhaps a very elaborately prepared one with a velvet cover, or perhaps a simple printed one. I say this because a few years ago, John and I were invited to a Passover celebration, and I was given the beautifully decorated front cover velvet edition. I think you just had the Common or Garden printed one, didn't you?
Yeah, very appropriate.
Anyway, back to the Passover meal in the upper room. This Passover meal was very special, and it was different from normal. As we heard from Frank, Jesus had arranged for the venue to be available. It was only Jesus and the 12. No others are mentioned. Jesus knew it was the last Passover he would celebrate with them, and he knew that events would soon lead to his death. And what about the 12? They've been with Jesus, listening, watching, even going out on mission without him. They'd heard him say more than once that he was going to Jerusalem to die there. And again, you get these verses in various Gospels, but I'm just reading from Matthew, and it's chapter 20 I want to look at first. Matthew 20, verses 17 to 19. Jesus says, as he was going up to Jerusalem, Jesus took the 12 disciples aside and said to them, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will turn him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. On the third day, he will be raised to life. And then in chapter 26, again of Matthew, Jesus had been speaking in parables, and then it says, Jesus finished saying all these things, and then he said to his disciples, as you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. So they've seen Jesus, they've heard Jesus. They'd seen how the crowds had reacted to Jesus entering Jerusalem on a donkey. I expect you celebrated that on Palm Sunday here, did you? We were in Denny and we celebrated there. They'd seen how Jesus had overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple, and how the chief priests and the teachers of the law had reacted, not pleased. They'd listened and watched as the chief priests and the teachers of the law, together with the elders, challenged Jesus. It's recorded in the Gospels, and in particular I want to read from Luke chapter 20, starting at verse 19. The teachers of the law and the chief priests looked for a way to arrest Jesus immediately after some more teaching, because they knew he had spoken this parable against them, but they were afraid of the people. And even they sent spies, it says, keeping a close watch on him, they sent spies who pretended to be honest. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he'd said, so that they might hand him over to the power and authority of the governor. So you have these various conversations with questions and answers. But Jesus, knowing their thoughts, knowing their plans, dealing politely but firmly with their answers. The disciples saw all this, particularly in what we now call Holy Week, between Palm Sunday and Maundy Thursday. The disciples have seen all this and the tension mounting as these people are trying to trap Jesus and trying to get him convicted. So surely the disciples realized what a difficult time this was for Jesus. Surely they wanted to gather round and show their support of their Master and Lord. But listen to chapter 22 of Luke and verse 24. A dispute arose among them at the Last Supper as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. So here they are. They're with Jesus, supposedly celebrating the Passover, and they're disputing and arguing who's the greatest of the 12 of them. Is this why Jesus took on the role of the servant and washed the disciples' feet? We know it's in John 13, and there are actually 17 verses dealing with that. And you could have a whole evening talking about that, so I'm not going to divert into that at the moment. But Jesus is ready for what's coming. The disciples don't seem to be supportive at all. How did just Jesus feel about this? After all these teachings and examples and years of being with Jesus, they have so much to learn. Of course, Jesus knew that one of the 12 would betray him. And again, this is in all the Gospels, but I'm reading particularly this time from John 13, verse 21. I particularly like the words of John because it starts by saying, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, ask him which one he means. Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish. Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, son of Simon. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. And of course, Peter, who, if you can remember the words about the foot washing, he was the one that argued with Jesus and said, don't wash my feet. Oh no, I couldn't let you do that. So he had that argument, and then, of course, he's the one that Jesus has to say, I tell you, Peter, before the cock crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me. So, what a terrible situation for Jesus to be facing. He wants to have this lovely time with the disciples. Some are arguing, one's going to betray him, one's going to deny him. Luke chapter 22 and verse 15, it says, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Words of Jesus just to those 12. And I'd just like us to think for a moment or two about why this was so important for Jesus. He wanted the disciples not only to look back to the sacrifice of the lamb at the first Passover, but to understand that their Lord was freely giving himself for the sins of the world and for their sins. He wanted to introduce the way of remembering his death, the piece of bread, the sip of wine, the celebration of a new covenant, but why then? If we could just look back at the second picture, please, Andy. Now, on this picture, there's a shadowy figure leaving, which is a shame because I like this picture in every other way, but I don't like the shadowy figure leaving because Luke's Gospel, and again it's chapter 20, chapter 22, and it's verse 20, Luke makes it clear that Judas was present at the point of the bread and the wine being introduced in this special way. Jesus says, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table." So if we could look at picture 3 now, please, Andy. This one is annoying because, again, it's the all sitting on one side. But a quick count will show you that there are actually 12 disciples there when Jesus is holding up what looks like the wafer as it became. But this is a 16th century painting, so that's how it was depicted. But there are 12. Now, when I first saw this picture, again, it was in a magazine, and the one at the very front at the right there, you notice he hasn't got a halo on. The version that I saw originally, he's painted grey because he's there, but that's the betrayer. No halo, and he was even his body, his skin was all in grey, but he was there. So, Jesus chose to include at this very special time the betrayer, the one who would deny him, the others who'd been squabbling about who was the greatest, and all the disciples who would run away in Gethsemane. And it's only relatively recently, having been a Christian now for 60 years, it's only recently that I thought, well, Jesus could have waited till after the resurrection to do this. He didn't have to do it at Passover. Why didn't he wait? Perhaps they would have paid more attention. Perhaps they would have understood better. But he chose to do it on that evening, despite the failings and the future failings of these people. And I came to the conclusion that perhaps one reason why Jesus did this, because that in the future, his followers, including you and me, would also get things wrong. We would also let him down. We would also choose to keep silent when we could speak up, or perhaps even say something that was the direct opposite of what we should say. But despite our failings as believers, we're welcome to the feast. We're privileged to participate, which is a tremendous place to almost stop. I said that I wasn't going to read the 17 verses about Jesus washing the disciples' feet, nor expect anyone else to do it either. But I thought I would just finish by reading verse 1 of that chapter 13 of John. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. That's where I'd like to leave it, with the thought that Jesus wanted to show his followers, including you and me, the full extent of his love. Thank you.